42-35, the Clemson lead 4 minutes into the second half.
Unfortunately for SU, Clemson would not stop hitting threes. It wasn't just Chase Hunter for the Tigers, but now forward Ian Shefflin wanted to join in on the three-point barrage.
Clemson feeds the post on the left block. Out to Shefflin, left wing three. It's good. Ian Shefflin.
Well, Austin, as you so eloquently put it, that was rough. When you shoot for over 50% from the field, over 50% from three, you'd expect to win. But no, the reality was an 86-72 loss for Syracuse against Clemson in the Littlejohn Coliseum. I mean, the defensive effort and this defensive performance, not it, AJ.
No, it wasn't. But at the end of the day, I didn't expect anything else. I didn't think Syracuse was going to win this game. I didn't think this game was going to be close. Both of those things were answered correctly. We're going to break down why we think both of those things were answered correctly, but I'm not really that surprised.
Well, we're going to talk about defense. We're going to be talking about the scoring and the lack of a second option for J.J. Starling, who had to look like a superhuman tonight. And also, we're going to bring in our play-by-play broadcaster from tonight's game, Jordan Leonard, to get his perspective on what happened in Clemson tonight. All that and more coming up on the Double Overtime starting right now.
The game may be over, but our coverage on WAER is not. Here on the Double Overtime, we'll be breaking down all the highs.
Copeland, left wing three! It's good! Quadir Copeland wins the game for Syracuse! For the first time in 1,856 days, Syracuse beats an AP Top 10 team.
Starling drives to his right, puts up a layup. No good, but Copeland with the putback slam. Oh my goodness, Quadir Copeland makes a statement.
And the lows.
Syracuse walked into John Paul Jones Arena looking to make a statement, and Virginia said, oh no you don't. Cavaliers 84, Orange 62, your final.
Well, Syracuse heads into North Carolina and faces its worst loss in its history in the Atlantic Coast Conference.
Heartbreaking. The Orange bow out in the second round of the ACC tournament for the second year in a row.
Delivering our hottest takes along the way.
The expectations should be higher after a few years when Adrian Autry sets that bar, but the bar is still low.
5-star, Donnie Freeman.
Yep.
I mean, this guy has the tools. I think he could be the truth.
I think Lampkin and the combination of him and Carlos will rejuvenize this team and make them an actual complete basketball team.
Get your voice heard by calling in at 315-443-2011 or check out our YouTube at WAER Sports Talk. It's the Double Overtime, and it starts right now.
Clemson, 86, Syracuse, 72. Look, AJ, this was a tough one. AJ Myers right across from me. I'm Shrikar Rajendran. Welcome into the Double Overtime. We got you up until 11 p.m. tonight. You can call into the show if you have any thoughts on what was a massacre of a game for Syracuse. 315-443-2011. You can text us if you'd like at 315-556-3929, or you can interact with us on Twitter at WAER Sports Talk. Right now, I feel like it's only fair to talk about the defense to start things off. I mean, this defensive performance was not up to par at all, and it follows a similar trend of what we've seen in the past from Syracuse. And if we look at the end of the first half, right off the bat, they went on a 10-0 run over the last 5 minutes. Yeah. So, AJ, what really happened there in that run? And I feel like that was the moment where momentum really started to shift in Clemson's favor.
Definitely. I think right at the midway point of that first half is when the momentum really swung in favor of the Tigers. And the reason why it makes so much sense to talk about bad defense first, you know, when it's a blowout loss, you're either in two roads. Is it bad defense or is it poor offense? It definitely wasn't poor offense. We're going to get to what was the problem on offense, but someone for Syracuse, J.J. Starling, was making this offense click and turn at times.
We will get into it a little bit later, but poor offense, I still think could be included in that discussion.
But I think the defense is worse. The defense is why this game was a blowout, and you said it. The last, what was it, the last 4:30 of this game, 10-0 run, you couldn't get any stop in the last 4 minutes of the game. That is crazy. That's unacceptable for a Syracuse team, and that's unacceptable for an ACC team that, okay, yes, Clemson's a good team, but you should still be competing with this Tiger squad. They just couldn't do it, and there's no defensive maestro on this team. I know Lucas Taylor's, I guess, the team's best defender. I don't know. I mean, who do you think the best defender on this team
I think individual defense is one thing, but Syracuse, for as long as I can remember, has been founded on good team defense, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense,
the zone defense, that's what it's been.
In that sense, oh my goodness, what a fall from grace.
Yeah.
But look, the Tigers shot 58% from the field in the first half. They only had 2 turnovers, right? And I think you can argue that's a difference in this one. One team was careless with the ball. The other had a better understanding of, okay, if we hold on to the ball, we're going to find our shot and we're going to win this game and rack up points while we do it, right? And I think that's exactly what Clemson's game plan was going into this. They took advantage of whatever miscue Syracuse was having on that front. But look, Chase Hunter, you want to talk about individual players. There's really no individual defender I can point out, but an individual that absolutely went off on Syracuse. 18 first half points for Chase Hunter. One of the best three-point shooters in the conference, arguably the best. Look, he was on it, and once he gets going, it is really, really hard to get him off his game because he's just that good. He works off rhythm. He works off flow. When you put him in, the avatar state, I would say, and if he gets into that flow state, it's over because he is going to make it rain on you, and he is going to make that defense pay. And perimeter defense already was an issue for Syracuse coming into this one.
It definitely was, and Clemson hit 9 threes in this game. And sure, some of them were contested, but there was a few that were wide open, and a wide open 3 here and there, fine, it happens. Credit to Clemson, their ball movement was insane. I mean, some of the best ball movement I've seen in a college.
Just around the horn.
It was kind of, I know we're kind of both some soccer people here, a little bit of tiki-taka. The way they were moving the ball was very soccer-esque, and it was great basketball to watch. Did Syracuse defend it that well? No, I don't think they did. The entire game, I think there was just constant defensive lapses. Every time Adrian Autry needed to call a timeout, it was to get his defense in order because Clemson was just continually knocking down shots. And the reason I'm going to go to the individual side is because Syracuse just didn't have, on this team, this roster does not have someone to say, all right, here's the guy, and for Clemson tonight, it was Hunter, who can't be stopped. We need you to clamp him down, lock him down, stop him from scoring, frustrate him. I'm thinking of a player like Patrick Beverly or a Marcus Smart. They don't have that player. I'm not saying it has to be of that essence, but someone who can just get into the face, frustrate a player that is hot, that's constantly knocking down
AJ,
shots. Syracuse doesn't have that.
Frankly, it's hard to find a player like that. And I think that's where we have to kind of admit that the archetype of player that we're looking for may not come around.
Yeah.
Well, no, it exists for sure, but it may not come around as often as we'd like. And when you're building a team, it's important to have those attributes in a player, but you're never going to find a guy where, well, not never, but you may not always find a guy that's like that. And I think that's okay. Maybe that is a guy that Syracuse ideally would like to have. Mm-hmm. But if it's not available, again, fall back on your team defense. Fall back on that because this was a bread and butter thing for Syracuse over the past however many years. If you don't have good foundational team defense, how far are you really going to go? I think that's my big question, and I'll ask that to you folks out there as well. Why do you think this defensive performance was as bad as it was? If you have any thoughts, you can chime in 315-443-2011 and go ahead and text us at 315-556-3929 or interact with us on Twitter at WAER Sports Talk. I think a lot of the defensive issues really just stem from communication. Mm-hmm. Del Jones hit a 3 in the first half where Eddie Lampkin basically switched on to someone else and then just switched back. And he didn't say anything. There was no form of, okay, you get this guy, I'll come back to you if you need. Nothing like that. And I think at this stage, when you're in the heart of ACC play, you got some good teams coming up. That can't be happening. It just cannot. I think communication is, again, I talk about foundational team defense. That's one of the facets, or one of the most important facets where, okay, Syracuse needs to lock this down.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that talking about locking down, they didn't lock down the paint at all. And I think part of this is because they don't, again, I'm going to go to the roster. I'm kind of blaming a lot on the roster here. There's Naheem McLeod, who has not played consistent minutes in a very long time. But Eddie Lampkin just isn't a guy on the offensive side. Absolutely, he can go to work in the paint. Defensively, though, he can't really stop anyone in the paint. I think Donnie Freeman would have made a slight difference in the paint points tonight. I think Clemson had a huge advantage in the paint tonight. So that did not help Syracuse. That Clemson could just easily bully their way into the paint. And part of that, I totally agree with you, goes on the communication. There was just points where guys would switch and there would be someone wide open under the basket for an easy 2. But another thing is it also goes from the offensive side. When Syracuse has 14 turnovers, that doesn't help your defense. When you're constantly having to hustle back and stop a fast break,
Clemson has a great transition offense. We saw it at multiple points throughout this game where Syracuse, maybe it wasn't even a turnover, maybe it was just a bad shot from Eddie Lampkin, but I really feel like this team could not get out in transition against this Clemson squad. And we got Keith from Cazenovia on the line who wants to talk about the SU coaching. Keith, what you got?
Well, I got to say, guys, sometimes you're going to come up across a team that is superior to you. And, realistically, we're not going to win this game. But it's the way that we lost. And I don't know that this coaching staff is the answer. And the reason why I say that is it's fundamentals. The number of turnovers, the lack of defense that you guys have been talking about, and also the lack of ball movement and assists. And those are fundamentals. You're not going to beat anyone or stay in the gym or get blown out if you can't at least execute on 2 out of those 3 things, let's say. But the turnovers, the lack of defense, the lack of assists, we got blown out of the gym. And that comes down to fundamentals. That's on the coaching staff. And I got to wonder sometimes, there was a lot of talk about whether Adrian Autry is the answer, it should be the guy. But when you see this kind of an effort, you kind of wonder whether they're even prepared when they step on the floor.
So, Keith, you're really putting the blame tonight here on Autry, not maybe on the players or the lack of players that SU has. You think Autry should be coaching these guys up better?
I just think that it comes down to fundamentals and protecting the ball. I mean, in middle school, you learn this stuff, right? And yes, you're going to go through the course of an ACC season or any college season, you're going to lose some players to injury. The next man's got to step up. But if you can't build a team that fundamentally plays solid basketball, the players are out there, and you can question the decisions they make, you can question the effort, but at the end of the day, it's got to be Autry and the staff in their ears saying, guys, we got to do better. Here's what we got to work on. Here's how we're gonna go up against this team. And I just don't see that against the better teams.
Well, Keith, you mentioned the better teams, but SU has a 3-game stretch coming up with Pitt, Stanford, and Cal. You mentioned the fundamentals. What would be the first thing you change or the first thing you get better at when it comes to these games? Because this is where you can take advantage.
Well, I think it's actually 2 things. First of all, defense. You got to contest shots. You got to put your hands up. You got to make an effort. There was a sequence under the basket where we had one of the Clemson players going out of bounds, tiptoeing the line, and instead of jamming 2 guys up in front of him, they both kind of recessed for a second, and it gave him the out. He almost still fell out of bounds. But I think, we're not a good shooting team. So playing one-on-one, ball and trying to rely on Sterling to carry this load, we don't have a second answer here. You got to look for the easy shots, and I think you got to move the ball around.
Well said, Keith. Well said. We want to thank you for your call. If you want to sound as good as Keith did just now, you can go ahead and call into the show at 315-443-2011. Again, you could text us 315-556-3929 or interact with us on Twitter at WAER Sports Talk. Shrikar Rajendran and AJ Myers breaking down Clemson's 86-72 win over Syracuse. I thought a lot of what Keith said, especially with putting your hands up, just basic stuff that they teach you from a while ago. I agree. And honestly, it is a little bit concerning that we're talking about this midseason.
Yeah, you shouldn't be. It's unacceptable to be talking about this midway through the year, and I think everything Keith said was spot on. I know I just said that, but there is clear, just basic things that this team isn't doing right on the defensive side, whether it's the closeouts, whether that's getting into the paint. It's just too many easy buckets. And against a great team like Clemson, you can't afford to give them easy buckets, especially when they're going to shoot the 3 ball so well. You can't allow the easy ones to go in if you already know that this team's going to be electric from beyond the arc, and that was the problem all game.
And that's why I asked the question of, when you go into these next 3 games against fairly easier opponents than you'll see in Clemson, these are things that, okay, yes, you may have the same mistake 1 or 2 times again, but at least you have the leeway and the leverage to come back from it. And I think that's the biggest difference. Against these better premier ACC teams, it gets a little difficult because they pounce on these opportunities. They pounce on those mistakes from Syracuse, whereas another team may not. So I think that's the most important difference here.
19 points off turnovers. I mean, that says a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that says a lot about the way this game swung. And I know that's maybe an offensive thing, but that bleeds into the defense. As I said, if you're constantly having to go in transition and trying to defend, it does not make any case easy for a team that already isn't a great defensive unit. And it's just the problem has been there all year. They've had, unfortunately, this is not Syracuse's first blowout loss of the season. You could probably count 4 or 5 games where they've been absolutely blown out of the building. This is another one to add to the list, and it always stems from the defensive side. And if Syracuse was ever going to keep this game close tonight, yes, it was going to be a shootout. It was never going to be a case of, Syracuse probably got some stops late on.
Right.
Or, they really locked down this Clemson team. walking into the station tonight, I was never going to thinking in my mind, all right, yeah, like if Syracuse really locks in defensively,
exactly,
like, this will, they can get this game. No, I was thinking, J.J. Starling's probably going to need to have 31 points. Lampkin's probably going to have to get towards the 20s. Neither of those two things happened. What do you know? Syracuse gets blown out.
Well, I don't want to go full negative Nancy mode here, AJ. Ian Shefflin only had 11 points tonight.
Sure.
I mean, he was a little bit limited, but do you think this is a good thing, a bad thing? How much stock can we really put into that? As an overall defensive performance, we've talked about all the bad, but I suppose a silver lining right here.
I mean, yeah, sure, a silver lining. I don't want to sound super negative. I'm always trying to look on the better side of things, but I just think he had an off night, to be honest. I think he just had a night where he wasn't really getting involved.
Well, not everyone for Clemson will go off, right?
Yeah,
surely.
Exactly. And I think he kind of saw like, my guards are hitting all these threes. I can kind of put my feet up tonight. Maybe they really won't need me that much, because somehow Clemson still got all those points in the paint, which is crazy given the poor night he had, or if you want to put in quotations, off night he had. I don't think it was Syracuse was great defending him. I just think he just didn't have a great night. And Clemson just didn't need to lean on him. They never were like, all right, let's go to Shefflin. We need to get a basket here. No, because they relied on their guards shooting threes.
Right. Four players in double figures says enough.
Yeah, exactly.
You could talk about 11 points for Shefflin, but, I mean, overall, from a team perspective, they still all did their thing.
5 of 9 too. I mean, he was efficient. When he got in the paint, 9 times out of 10 he was scoring.
Smart with his shots too, right? So I don't think there's much stock we can put into that. Okay, great. You held him to double digits, right? It's kind of like that, where if you'd held him to single digits and maybe he was not as efficient from the floor, we'd have a little bit more to discuss there. But overall, I just don't think there's too much stock you can put into that.
No,
plain and simple.
No, it's just I think he had an off night, and Syracuse again. There's just no. I'm gonna lean on the. You're gonna go more on the team aspect, which I agree. I'm gonna lean on more. It's just there's a lack of those defensive maestro players. It's just not on this team, and there's nothing Autry can do about it really. I mean, he can coach the team as much as he wants, but he's not gonna find that player.
We got Jackson from Syracuse on the line. He wants to talk about the state of this program, which is certainly in discussions right now. Jackson, what you got for us?
Hello, thank you so much for having me on tonight. And I had been on last year when it came to the state of what's the future of Syracuse basketball. And what I said at that point is what I will reiterate now. Jerry McNamara should be our head coach, should have been our starting head coach, and we would be in another place in basketball with Jerry McNamara as our head coach. He's won a championship as a player. He knows what it's like to play under Boeheim, coach alongside Boeheim. I don't see any other route, any other possible way of this program getting back on its feet. When you see performances like tonight, where we're playing man zone, but we're running around like we're playing a 2-3 zone, that makes no sense to me. When we bring the ball down the court and these defenses won't let us pass the three-point line and we can't get in for a basket, that doesn't make sense to me. What happened to the Syracuse basketball where we bleed orange through the pigskin on that ball? I swear to you right now, and to my mother, and God bless my soul of my nana and my grandfather. These are people that bleed orange like I do, and I just want to see the program back where we.
I got one big thing for you, Jackson. What would Jerry McNamara do differently, though? What would he do? What would he do differently?
Win.
You don't know that. You have no idea. I don't think you can put that much of a blame. Sure, Autry's
what's he doing at Siena right now? He's brought a program up from the horizons.
All right, little different standards,
though. He wasn't given an opportunity.
I don't think you can. It's only year 2 for Autry. I don't think you can go as far as saying this is entirely Autry's fault.
Jackson, what are the immediate impacts of a Jerry McNamara hire? Like, what do you think would happen to this team immediately, right from the onset next season?
I think it'd just be like what's that? Crucible. It'd be like Crucible back in the day. It'd be skyrocketing. It'd be the biggest steel mill, Salt City again. That's what would happen. We would be parading the streets before we even won a national
Adrian
championship.
Autry also
we already think we're going to win one.
Also played under Jim Boeheim too. Like, I mean, they were both a part of this program.
Did he win a national championship though?
No, but okay, Jerry, he won one national championship. How? I mean, he went to the Final Four.
That's the city of Syracuse would. Come on now. I'm telling you. The leadership is what drives teams together, is what brings people together, it's what brings communities together.
Mm-hmm. All right, you're making valid points, but unfortunately, I think Jim Boeheim was here for over 50 years. I think Adrian Autry's going to be here for a little bit longer. You're going to have to get used to him, I think.
Well, and hopefully when it comes to NIL, we can toss out a little more salad.
There you go. I think you have to give credit to Adrian Autry for these recruits that he's bringing in. I think I will give him the benefit of the doubt there, and yes, he's a great recruiter, but where are these recruits going? Lampkin, he might be one of our best players on the court, but $600,000 for 1 year. Come on now. Where's this? We're losing momentum here in very late in the season.
Well, Jackson, we want to thank you for your call and this checkup on the state
Thank you
of
for having
SC
me on the
basketball.
call here. Go Orange. I bleed orange all day.
Of course. Thank you for calling in, Jackson. If you want to sound like him, you can call into the show 315-443-2011. You can text us at 315-556-3929, or you can interact with us on Twitter at WAER Sports Talk. We got you up until 11 o'clock here on the double overtime. AJ, you just had a fiery discussion right there, but also quite civil.
Sure, Jackson made great points. You can question Adrian Autry's in-game coaching, sure. I think it still needs work, but it's only year 2. Give the guy a break. And Jim Boeheim didn't win a national championship until I don't know what year it was, but he was a coach for many years before he won a national championship. I know he went to the Final Four before that, of course. It's way, way, way too early to start considering Adrian Autry's job. It doesn't make any sense. It's not all his fault.
Do you think the leash is tightened at all?
No, it's only year 2. It takes a while. This isn't the NBA. This isn't professional where you can just, one offseason totally flip the switch. I understand you have the transfer portal, but he's still getting used to that. And I think his ideal program is bringing in freshmen, not going to the transfer portal like what he just did. I think he's still got some players that Jim Boeheim brought in, of course. I know most of them are gone, but you got to give him at least, I may sound crazy for this, but you got to give him at least 10 years.
Well, you'd have to hope that one of those guys that Autry brings in can be that second option, right? As we saw tonight, J.J. Starling was doing it all. And when we come back on the double overtime, we're going to dissect this offensive performance. Stay with us.
I'm Scott Tong. The fall.
Clock, Starling pumps, steps to the side, three-pointer, goes in from the top of the key. Multiple threes for JJ.
The double overtime rolling on. AJ Myers alongside Shrikar Rajendran. Shrikar, it's cold outside, so hopefully you're inside watching us on YouTube at WAER Sports Talk or on Twitter. But if you're not, if you're in your car, hopefully you got the heat on, you can call in 315-443-2011, and you can text us 315-556-3929. I just kind of had a crazy take maybe about head coach Adrian Autry, and Stan wants to talk about it. Stan, what do you got?
Hey there. First of all, I love you guys' show. I've been listening and watch your show and watching Syracuse since Roy Danforth was the coach.
Love that, Stan.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, and Jimmy Boeheim's tenure there, he was great. We loved Jimmy, but near the end there, the last 5 years or whatever it was, and he wasn't doing so good. It was time for him to for a change. And Adrian Autry was a really good basketball player for Syracuse too. And Jerry McNamara was too, but Jerry McNamara was on the team with Carmelo, and a guy like Carmelo Anthony being that good brings everyone else around him to another level. That's what great players do.
Couldn't agree with you more. Yeah.
Right, but what I want to say is Adrian, this is his second year. He had a great first year. He had a good first year. And he's this year's a little rough, but he's got some good recruits coming in. And Adrian Autry was a really good basketball player, and they were successful when he played with him. So, Adrian Autry needs to, I think one of you guys said, let's give him a few years. And you know what? Say in 5 years, it's not going anywhere with him, or 3 to 5 years. Why wouldn't Syracuse look to the outside for someone already experienced in coaching already, similar to, Fran Brown, obviously in football, wasn't a coach, but he had a successful program and with the recruiting. But, I would think if Adrian didn't work out, to get this program back, look to the outside for some already experienced coach with a decent record and pay him the money.
Stan, I loved everything you said about Autry. You got to give the guy time. He just got into this position. You got to give him time. But is there anything you think that maybe he should be working on better in that in-game? Like, let's look at tonight's game. Was there something where you're like, he should have called a timeout there, or the defensive scheme isn't good? Is there one thing you think, all right, maybe here's where he could get better?
I gotta say, I didn't watch the game because I was very busy.
That's all right.
I kept checking back to it, and I go, here we go, another typical 20 to 30 point loss. Or maybe it wasn't that much tonight, but two real good teams. And then when they play a lesser team, they compete with them. So I really didn't watch the game as much. But let's see. I don't know a lot about basketball, but I will say this. When I see Syracuse playing a good team, a decent team, like a top 20 team, one of the things I see, this is real simple stuff, is, they make their baskets. They shoot the ball, it goes in the bucket, especially from the outside. Syracuse doesn't do that. They miss a lot of buckets. If they made another 10% of their shots, their deficits would be, at least 10 to 15 points. So they need to make their shots.
Definitely, Stan. Saying the simple things. I love it. Thank you so much for your call, and thank you for continuing to listen to us here on the Double Overtime. Syracuse falling to Clemson, 86-72. We've talked a lot about the defense. We've gotten in a little bit of the coaching now. Keep the phone lines coming in, 315-443-2011. That's how you can get a hold of us and get your thoughts over the air. But, Tricard, we got to talk about the offensive side of the ball because give J.J. Starling some props. Give him a pat on the back. 25 points, 10 of 16 shooting.
He's Superman.
He really is.
He is really Superman.
Since he's come back from injury, he has been outstanding.
And he's shooting the lights out. I also really like the shot selection. I think it's improved from the start of the season. He has really grown into his own. I think he is really that number one option that Syracuse could look towards. But the problem is there's no number two.
Yep.
There's no other guy that you can look at. And ultimately, for a team to succeed, you can't be relying on one person. I think of that across any sports, really. You can't rely on one person. It's not a formula for sustained success. So I think when we look at this offense and how they performed tonight, it kind of just embodies what Syracuse's season has been all about. JJ drops 25, and the next leading scorer is Eddie Lampkin with 14.
Quiet 14.
I
swear, every game it's been, other than the Notre Dame game maybe there's another one I'm forgetting about, but every game it's just like, Eddie Lampkin had a quiet 11 points.
But we're both not looking to him as the number two, right? It's not...
Right? Wasn't he supposed to be the number two? Wasn't he supposed to be? I thought he'd be more of a scoring presence. Maybe that was just me not watching enough of his game before he got here.
See, me personally, I expected Chris Bell to be that number two.
Oh, wow. You expected him to be number two.
Going into the year, I thought it would be Chris Bell, but he just hasn't really improved on his consistency. He still has all the talent. Chris Bell is really good. But it's just about putting it all together, and he just has not fully done that yet. And it really sucks.
And this is, again, where you want to talk about head coach Adrian Autry and why this season is not his fault and why you can't say he needs to step away or crazy talk like that, is because he's been dealt a difficult hand. Chris Bell was supposed to be a 14-point per game kind of guy, right?
Well, I wouldn't say a difficult hand because he has a good roster in front of him.
But they're not performing. I mean, how is he going to fix
if
Chris
they're
Bell?
If they're not performing,
What
then
is he
who
going to
does
do?
that
He's
really
moved
fall
him to the
on?
bench. I think it falls on the player. Chris Bell should be doing much better than he is this season. He
I'm
should
of
be
the
the
belief-
knockdown three-point shooter.
Look, I'm of the belief Chris Bell is sure. I agree there, but I'm of the belief that if a whole team is not really doing so well, and ultimately not playing up to standards as a team, and when you look at what they got on paper, look, I tend to think that falls on coaching. I tend to think there's something there that could be fixed, and we'll get into that a little bit later on what could be fixed for this program. But I really don't think it falls on the players as much as it does Autry. Now, I'm not calling for Autry's job or anything.
No.
But I do think that there needs to be some, not necessarily wholesale changes, but some changes altogether.
So you think Autry could have done a better job at getting a second option on this team?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Well, he's recruited a good team.
Yeah.
I expected one of these guys to step up, and you
There you
mentioned
go.
Chris Bell.
Yep, there
you
you
mentioned
go.
Chris Bell, and
Yeah.
I agreed with you there.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about a lack of a second option versus how the team is performing, I think it's two completely different, arbitrary conversations.
Okay.
You know, so I don't think it really
Goes hand in
relates.
hand. Okay.
Yeah, it
That's
doesn't.
fair.
It doesn't
That's
go. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't go hand in hand. But ultimately, it's something that Syracuse will have to fix in the coming years. You know, with the arrival of Keon Anthony, who knows?
Coming years, can they fix it this season?
And I don't know about this season. Look, if I had to go out and say it, I don't think this is an issue that will be resolved.
And here's
for the
the
rest
problem:
of the year.
J.J. Starling, when he has an off game, you saw that the first half against Notre Dame. It
Yeah.
was awful. They were down by 17. If he is not on, and that's a lot to ask for J.J. Starling. I know he's the number one guy. He's the star player, sure, but he needs help. He's kind of like LeBron James on that 2007 team. There's no help. He just doesn't have it. Eddie Lampkin, for me, every game is too quiet from him. He doesn't get involved quick enough. Maybe that's a coaching thing, sure, but he's not doing enough. Donnie Freeman's a freshman. He's now hurt. He hasn't played in 5 games. This bench has nothing. Peter Majstorovic, he's a hustle player guy. He just had, he had 7-ish minutes tonight.
Yeah.
Didn't do a whole lot. Jaquan Carlos was supposed to be the assist guy. He hasn't been that either. He's not a scorer. There's no scores on this team. Chris Bell was supposed to be the knockdown three-point shooter, and he's not.
But the crazy thing is, this offense was still efficient. They were still
Yeah,
producing.
well, thank you, J.J. Starling.
Well, thank you, JJ. but look, even the percentages, right? You know, you shoot for over 50% from the field and from 3. You're not mad at that.
No.
You're really not mad at that. But
And
ultimately,
I
they
think-
still lost.
And you're talking to next season. I think Elijah Moore is someone you could say next season.
Potentially.
He can be that second option. I know he's had a really difficult middle part of this season. He's just a freshman. I don't think it was expected
Well,
that
it's
he'd be in the
difficult.
starting lineup.
You know, he's not getting enough minutes, and even in those minutes, he hasn't been producing enough.
Yeah, I mean,
so-
his confidence definitely is a little rattled, and he's even said that. And he's said that he needs to, regain his confidence, just do the little things better. But
Yeah.
I mean, if he can turn it on again, like he did against Tennessee, and I think Cornell. I know it was Tennessee. I think Cornell was the game before that or after. If he can do that again, then watch out. Then maybe they do have that second option to go with Starling. But for right now, they just don't have it.
Well, I really do think that. I think back to that Tennessee game for Elijah Moore, and you talk about confidence. He was pulling up like it was nothing.
I know, but then he's a freshman though,
right? But it was almost like second nature to
Yeah.
him. So that tells me, he has the potential.
does.
He has the upside in him.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's almost like the Chris Bell issue. Can he put it all together in his time at Syracuse?
I know. Well, and Chris Bell had it all together last year. I mean, this guy was draining
He
threes.
did, but I do think consistency was also a problem back then, and it still is a problem now. And ultimately,
he's been consistently poor all season.
year by year, it compounds on itself,
Yeah.
and it becomes more and more of a problem until it's ultimately too late.
I mean, if you would have sat Adrian Autry down at the start of the season and said, hey, in the thick of ACC play, Chris Bell's going to be coming off the bench, I think he would have fainted. He would have been like, what? Chris Bell's going to be coming off the bench midway through ACC play?
Right.
That was not expected at all, and he had to do that because he's not performing. You're not going to start a guy who has no confidence and can't knock down a shot.
I think all this just goes to show that, again, Syracuse has the talent. On paper, I still think this team is really good. I can't hate. I can't hate. But it's just a matter of whether it's coaching, whether it's minute flaws in the game. it's hard to kind of shape around what really could be the issue here.
Yeah, but the clear issue is that it's too heavily reliant on J.J. Starling.
That's the offensive issue.
Yeah,
there's an offensive issue, and then I would say multiple defensive issues.
Yeah, they need someone else to be a consistent offensive threat. If you think you have someone in mind who we're not mentioning, Jair Davis, we haven't really talked about him yet, give us a call, 315-443-2011. We'd love to hear your thoughts on how Syracuse can fix these offensive woes, because they have a great player offensively right now, J.J. Starling, who's playing out of his mind. He hit 5 threes tonight. Syracuse had a season-high 11 threes made. You can also thank Jair Davis, who knocked down 2, who's a player you did not expect to knock down threes, but he got some open looks and he knocked them down. The first one he knocked down was contested, so that was good, and I think Jair Davis has done a good job on the offensive end, but again, going into the season, it wasn't like you were going to say, oh, Jair Davis, maybe he's the second option. No, you were saying it was Chris Bell. You were going to say it was Donnie Freeman or even Eddie Lampkin, and those 3 players just haven't really delivered.
Because we were looking at Jair Davis as a guy that could really bang in the paint, who could be that interior presence.
Yeah, energy guy off the bench.
But again, he hit that tough shot over Ian Shefflin at the buzzer too, right? So it kind of just came out of nowhere. But I think an overall factor early in these games was great passing. Syracuse was actually moving the ball pretty well to set up these threes. You hit one from JJ, and you get one from Jair Davis. But unfortunately, it was followed up by poor shot selection from Eddie Lampkin. He tried a 3, didn't fall. Nope. Clemson goes out in transition, gets a quick bucket.
Eddie Lampkin's got to stop taking threes.
Yeah.
It's just because every time he misses, it's a transition bucket, easy 2 for the opponent.
Look, I don't know if there's such thing as a team heat check, but even if there was, I don't think you do it after you make 2 threes. But look, Eddie Lampkin tried it, but those are the shots that you cannot afford to take.
No, and here's what I'm going to say this. If Donnie Freeman was playing tonight, I still think they would have lost the same score, because he hasn't shown to me at all season that he can be the second option either. I think there was one game early on, forget what game it was. It was early on, really early on, against a non-ACC team that he kind of had a coming-out game, I guess you would say. But in ACC, now he hasn't played much in ACC play either. That's the problem. But to me, he hasn't showed that he could be the second option either. It'll be interesting to see when he comes back, because he'll be coming back with a red-hot J.J. Starling. So maybe, hopefully he'll be coming back with a red-hot J.J. Starling. So maybe those two can kind of link up together and gel their 2 offensive games, and that could really spark something. But if not, this is going to be a long season. It already is a long season. It could get even longer.
Well, me, alongside a lot of other SU fans, were really high on Donnie Freeman going into this year. And I do think that, obviously the potential is still there. And what I would think he would bring on the court when he comes back is dynamics. He would bring, that athleticism he has, the ability to play all over the floor.
Another presence in the paint.
It's another presence in the paint.
That's what they really needed tonight, too.
Right, and I agree with you. Would it do anything in terms of offensive production or how the score would look?
If he can get 15 points, sure, but he hasn't shown that he can do that consistently.
Right, and against maybe lesser opponents, it could work and you'll get wins, but they were going to do that without Donnie Freeman anyway. But against really good ACC teams, the cream of the crop, it's not going to be enough. And for how highly touted Donnie Freeman was coming into this year, that does kind of resonate with me a little bit.
It does. I mean, I remember I said, we were on this, it was a sports night before the season started, and I was like, he's just a freshman, you got to give him some leeway, but then everyone kind of fought back on me saying he's a 5-star, he should be dropping 30 points a night, all this stuff, but
mea culpa, myself included.
I wasn't going to say your name directly, but I was like, Streetcar, he got to me. He was like, hey, Donnie Freeman should be doing all this and that. He hasn't, and of course his injury is unfortunate, and it's kind of plagued his season even more. But, I mean, it's clear. If Syracuse is going to win games this year, J.J. Starling is going to need to have 30 points.
Yeah. 30 points is really tall order for a guy as good as J.J. Starling. Yeah. Because when you look at it,
he should be asked to do that,
right? Because when you look at it from a defender's perspective, you kind of just double team JJ. He'll pick up the dribble, and that's another thing. Off-ball movement.
Louisville did that. Yeah.
Off-ball movement should be such a key, because there would be times JJ Starling. Obviously, they're going to double team him at some point if he's scoring this many points. He picks up the dribble. And, you'll have Chris Bell off on one side, just not moving. You have Lucas Taylor on another side, just not moving. You need to give JJ some comfortability there.
And part of it, I think, is that Chris Bell, it's a confidence thing. I think he's almost kind of scared to get the ball at times because he knows his offensive game just isn't there. And Lucas Taylor, he doesn't have much going for it.
You can't be afraid of that.
No, you shouldn't be. You shouldn't be. Right, no, absolutely. It's unacceptable to be afraid of it, but I do think there is that aspect of these guys being like, if I get the ball, I don't know if I can score. I'm not sure. I think Elijah Moore, he had that. He had that flair to him when he was dropping 20 points against Tennessee, but he hasn't done that. If he can regain, that's the hope. That's for me. That's the hope. If Elijah Moore can retool his confidence, because I can't say much on Donnie Freeman because he's not playing. It's hard to judge a guy when he's been out for the last 5 games. But if Elijah Moore can retool that offensive game, there's some hope for Syracuse, I think.
Well, we got Jim from Syracuse on the line who wants to give his thoughts on this one. Jim, what you got for us?
Hey, fellas. So, I'm listening to you talk, and, you guys know a lot of basketball and everything. Number one, I don't see any way that Chris Bell could ever be counted on as a number 2 guy. You never have any idea what you're going to get out of the guy, ever.
Right.
I mean, but, the thing that I see with this team, I mean, there's so much really I could say, but there seems like just a lack of willpower because, they have so many games where they just, lose by 17, 19, 20, 23, and they're the easiest team in the league to score against. I mean, teams just routinely are wide open for 3-point shots. I mean, a lot of that is just, it seems to me anyways, is determination and willpower, and it just doesn't seem to be there when you lose the way they lose on a consistent basis.
Right, Jim.
And I don't know who to. I've played a lot of sports. I know how hard it is.
Me
but,
too.
When you lose like that, just kind of go down, fairly easily. On some level, it's just a lack of inner fortitude. I don't really know how else to explain it. Is that coaching? Is that the players? I don't know. I mean, I guess you would have to say it has something to do with coaching, though.
Right, Jim, you mentioned an interesting point with willpower. For the rest of the season, just a general outlook, do you think there's any point where Syracuse can get that drive back? Because they go into a pretty easy 3-game stretch here with, Pitt, Stanford, Cal. Do you think they'll get that willpower and that drive back?
I kind of thought they might have gotten it back Saturday, to be honest with you, against Notre Dame because of the way that, the kid Cuff came in and, took that kid Burton out of his game. And I really thought that when a guy plays like that and he puts it all out there and he plays with so much, intensity that I thought the rest of the team might rally around that. I really saw that as some hope that maybe this team would find some sort of an identity. But they came out today, and I mean, they couldn't offensively. They couldn't have asked for any more. They got the first 5 shots. Starling drilled them down. But the thing about JJ, I love his game and I love him. But he's another guy. Even when he gets 20 points, you don't exactly know how you're going to get it out of him. You don't know if he's going to miss 5 or 6 jump shots in a row,
That's a good point, Jim,
or if he's going to make them. So it doesn't seem like there's anybody that they can count on, and I don't really see this team turning it around. I'm not trying to be a pessimist.
No, we agree
by
with
any
you, Jim.
stretch of the imagination.
We agree with you. We thank you for your call, giving your thoughts. Really
all right,
appreciate
guys.
it. Syracuse falling to Clemson 86-72. Me and Shrikar have delved into the defensive side of the ball, and we've also now touched on the offensive side. But now we got to get to a guy that was at the game, our play-by-play guy, Jordan Leonard. He'll be on the show when we come back after this quick break.
At Marketplace,
passes right to Moore. 3 on the shot clock. From the logo, passes it right. Davis catch and shoot 3. He beats the buzzer. Jair Davis, not much of a three-point shooter, only his 6th on the season.
Welcome back into the double overtime. Shrikar Rajendran alongside AJ Myers breaking down Syracuse's 86-72 loss to Clemson. But we have a third person with us now calling in from Clemson. We have our play-by-play broadcaster from tonight's game, Jordan Leonard. Jordan, how are you and how's Clemson?
I'm doing great, Shrikar. I'm sitting here at the top of the Little John Coliseum just under the catwalk. And, what I will say is I am glad I actually am in Clemson, South Carolina, because I heard it was in the negatives today up in Syracuse.
Freezing.
It was up to about 38 degrees and sunny here in South Carolina. Which
Oh,
is nice.
Jordan, you're making us all jealous.
Makes the trip worth it.
Absolutely. I'm sure it does. And talk about great arena names. Little John Coliseum.
Little John.
Great arena name. But back to the basketball. Jordan, this game started off promising for Syracuse. They were in it in those first 10 minutes. Did you pinpoint where that momentum really swung in that first half?
It swung right before, it was an extended first kind of segment of the game. They have these, media timeouts, as everyone knows, the under 16, under 12. The under 16 didn't come to the 14-minute mark-ish because there was no dead balls, and that's about where the momentum kind of went away for Syracuse. I mean, J.J. Starling was unconscious to start the game. They didn't turn the ball over, and Syracuse's half-court defense wasn't bad to start the game. They actually played pretty well, in my opinion. They kind of held Chase Hunter down, but then it was just kind of combination of turnovers in transition. Chase Hunter got going. And then I think the pick-and-roll defense was not very well after that. Eddie Lampkin kind of was playing drop coverage, and there wasn't really much communication after that. And once Clemson got going, and they shoot 40% from 3 from a team perspective, they shot 45% today. That's pretty much where the game turned on its head.
And we look at this game, and one thing that me and AJ really pointed out was the turnover differential. And you look at what Clemson was able to do with them. They got 19 points off of those turnovers compared to just 4 for Syracuse. I mean, there has to be something that really contributed into Syracuse playing this sloppy, huh, Jordan?
Yeah, the turnovers were bad. Honestly, in terms of total number of turnovers, not Syracuse's worst game. But like you mentioned, Shrikar, the 19 points off those turnovers was really big. A lot of live ball turnovers leading to Clemson transition points. And it wasn't really ball pressure, at least that's what Kyle Cuff said and Coach Autry said post-game. It was more just making the wrong reads. There was a couple times, whether it was Jair Davis or Eddie Lampkin on the baseline where they tried to do a cross-court feed. Coach Autry said after the game, I don't know why they were thinking of doing that. You just can't do that in the ACC, especially through the air with all those hands through the lane and all that stuff. And I think that was really where it stemmed from, was wrong reads and really kind of, especially when J.J. Starling had the ball, pressuring him so much to try to get rid of it, and him trying to make a play led to a lot of turnovers.
So do you think there's anything fundamentally that Syracuse could do in these next few games to kind of mediate that?
I don't know. It's a good question. It really kind of – I mean, I think they can just be cleaner with the ball and make better decisions, but at the same time, based on who they have on the floor, their ball handlers, and the different looks that teams are giving them because of how – drastically better J.J. Starling is at scoring the ball than everyone else on the floor. It's going to be hard for them to limit the turnovers based on that. But, you can definitely take more care of the ball, but it might hurt kind of the offense's aggressiveness at the same point.
Jordan, I've always thought that Adrian Autry's been very honest in these blowout losses when he's gotten to the podium. How was he after this one?
He was pretty honest, AJ.
Yeah.
I'll give you that. You were right spot on. He wasn't happy. He didn't take any solace in Syracuse starting off well, which is one of the first times they've started off well pretty much all season. But they just need to play harder. They need to make better decisions. And honestly, I think the message today was being aggressive. I think if you watch the game back a second time, there's a lot of times where Syracuse does a lot of pick-and-roll action like a lot of teams do at the top, especially with J.J. Starling trying to get him downhill. And just nobody coming off those screens got downhill. The rollers didn't go downhill. Nobody was getting towards the lane and putting pressure on the Clemson defense down low. And that's really what Syracuse needs to do when you're a team. I mean, they shot the 3-ball well today, 11 of 21, but usually doesn't shoot the 3-ball well.
Well, going off what AJ had to say about Adrian Autry, I was scrolling through Twitter during the game, and I saw a few people say that Autry was essentially emotionless on the bench, but again, I don't trust everything I see on Twitter, so that's why I have you. But what did you think about Autry during the game? Was there any wild reaction from the sidelines, or was it more of just a mellow kind of game for Autry here?
From my perspective, it was not the most fired up we've seen Coach Autry, but there's only so much, and he talked about this, there's only so much you can do. the message that has been kind of sent for most of the season and really emphasized after the Notre Dame game, just because of this turnaround that Syracuse had, was choices.
Yes.
You prepare the same way for every game. You watch the film. You know what they're going to do. He said Clemson didn't do anything different than they've shown him on film, and it's the choice of playing defense and choice of running aggressive offense and the different things that you have to choose to do every game. So honestly, I think he was not as kind of vocal or if you want to compare it to Michael Shrewsbury at the end of the game, that angry, because at the end of the day, he can only do so much. The players have to choose to execute essentially on the floor.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying with Coach Autry and people wanting to throw him out of the dome this early on.
It's too early.
I did hear that, AJ.
Yeah. But
the problem with that is, and I agree to an extent, the problem is in college basketball is you as the head coach create the roster.
Yeah.
So
That's what I'm
it's really
saying.
hard to take all the blame away from Coach Autry because he's the one that made the roster. I mean, you bring in transfers, Jair Davis, Jaquan Carlos, Lucas Taylor. Lucas Taylor is supposed to be shooting the three ball this year. 3-and-D didn't turn out to be like that. So the problem this year, there's not many shooters. They don't have a ball handler really outside of JJ that can create going to the 10. Because let's be real, Jaquan, when he goes to the basket, is not looking to score. So I get where you're coming from, but also at the same time, when you build the roster, it's hard to not blame the coach.
Right, and for what it's worth, I still do think it's a very talented roster, but I see it as more of a collection of talent rather than a basketball team that can move with the ebbs and flows of the game. Right?
It might be a talented roster, but I don't know if it blends well.
That's
exactly.
Yes,
that's
that's
my
the problem
point.
with the transfer portal. It's hard to if you just pick guys all over the country. It's hard for them to mesh in just one quick season. And unfortunately, with a lot of these guys are getting out of the transfer portal, they're only going to be here for a
It goes
year.
beyond how many stars you have next year.
But what about Louisville though? Louisville's basically entire team is new. So
And they've done it. Yeah, they've done it. Yeah.
You have to. It definitely might take some time to mesh, but at some point you got to mesh, or you just didn't pick the right pieces that fit together. When you look at the transfer portal and how Syracuse did it, other than Eddie Lampkin, even Eddie Lampkin, they were picking guys that kind of fit roles within this team. So it's the question of, do you pick guys, and maybe if you guys want to answer this, do you pick guys based on roles that they would fill on your projected team, or are you just trying to go out and get the best transfers available and then craft a plan around that?
I think you got to pick guys that fit your team and fit what you want, fit your culture.
Well,
you
ideally,
can't just go picking stars and hoping for them to blend in.
Ideally, you want a bit of both. I think, yes, you do want the guys that will fit the roles on your team more.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the talent to kind of supplement that, then it doesn't really pan out the way you want.
I mean, let's be real. The best Syracuse teams were not really the most talented ones. I mean, Jim Boeheim, and this goes to the point that you were making, Jordan, is Jim Boeheim assembled guys that he knew he could coach and he could build up from the ground up. I almost wonder, though, maybe the transfer portal isn't necessarily Autry's style. I know we'll probably need to blend to that because that's where college basketball is going, but I think you got to give him time. You got to give him years to bring in freshmen and develop guys because we haven't seen that yet, I don't think.
I definitely don't think it's his style. He had to this year.
Yeah.
I mean, as you know, because basically half the roster left or graduated. Probably more than half the roster, actually. But that's why it's hard. He has a good freshman class coming in next year. And next year is probably going to be a prove-it year because Syracuse is not going to make the NCAA tournament this year, and then that would be 4 years in a row. And Syracuse fans won't like that, but at the same time, he hasn't had any chance to develop anyone.
Exactly.
When he took over the roster, and this is where it becomes hard, especially with an assistant coach that takes over, because legitimately he did recruit most of those guys.
Yeah.
Because he was one of the main recruiters for Syracuse as an assistant coach. But now, you don't have any of the guys that Autry recruited out of high school except for Donnie Freeman, who might leave, who hasn't played in a couple games anyway, Elijah Moore, who's clearly adjusting to college basketball too. So, yeah, it's tough to gather because you want to give Coach Autry time to get freshmen and develop them, but at the same time, he has to get them to stay in the transfer portal too. It's a weird time in college basketball to be a new head coach.
Well, Jordan, I think you talk about development, but I think that's a little bit hard when we look at it just from an overall season performance from these guys, where I could only argue maybe one guy really saw development this season.
Are you going to say Elijah Moore?
No, I was going to say J.J. Starling.
Oh, okay.
I think J.J. Starling's the only guy that's really full-on improved and developed. So when you look at it I get it, it's only half a season, but from what I'm projecting, we're not going to see too much more development. So from just this season, it's a little bit hard to look down the road and be like, okay, yeah, they're just going to develop here.
Well, that's been the problem, is nobody's even lived up to the expectations of kind of what they had going in. I mean, you can argue Eddie Lampkin's probably he's doing kind of what he expected. He was 1 rebound off of his 5th straight double-double. But that's kind of what it goes into a season. I was talking about this with some of our other W8ER Sports Talk members, and it's weird to kind of think about because college basketball and college athletics is different, than a professional league. At this point in a professional league, you'd be probably not like tanking, but kind of tanking to get a draft pick. But in college, go out and win the games. It's not going to really control your recruiting class. You don't get, a higher pick in the recruiting cycle based on your season last year. So, I mean, that's the big question kind of coming down the stretch. And maybe one of the reasons that Elijah Moore is still starting is, Coach Autry trying to develop somebody where next year he can really help out the more freshmen that are coming in.
Well, we had someone in our YouTube comments ask, how do these other teams mesh? And if you want to check out our double overtime on YouTube, you can go to WAER Sports Talk on YouTube. But I think that's exactly the point. These other teams mesh by way of good coaching. And it's a little bit hard when you look at this team and you see how they haven't meshed, and you start to compare them to other teams, and the problems just kind of compound onto itself.
It's just year 2, though. It's just year 2.
It goes back to, I think, and this happens a lot in sports, is every year you don't have to run the same stuff. Like, based on what your roster is, you have to adjust to how they play. So, obviously, and can take some of this with a grain of salt. Chris Bell, has not been the three-point shooter that Syracuse needs this year. But based on the roster, Syracuse has done a good job at trying to play through J.J. Starling, but nobody else has stepped up, or they haven't been able to kind of draw up plays in the paint for Eddie Lampkin, Jair Davis enough where that's that viable second option. They've done it from time to time, but it's never really worked. I mean, look, bring Louisville back up as an example. I mean, they got more talented transfers than Syracuse. I'll definitely start with that. Mm-hmm. But Pat Kelsey has created a system. Maybe it's the same thing as he was doing at Charleston. It probably is, but he's created a system and drawn up plays that really play to his player's style. That's a lot of play in one sentence, but that's how you try to make college athletes effective.
Jordan, I got 2 in-game questions for you, and neither have to do much about the game. Donnie Freeman, was he on the bench again tonight? Was he in the boot, or did he not make the trip?
Yeah, he was on the bench. He was wearing the same boot, right leg, lower right leg, so right foot area. Same demeanor as the other games. Wasn't really out there in pregame warmups. Was on the bench. Was in the locker room after the game. Still listed as day-to-day. Still a right foot injury. It's the longest day-to-day I think we've all ever seen. But he's still hurt. Still day-to-day. Could come back. Against Pittsburgh.
Any day.
Could
any day.
Exactly. Could cut exactly. But this is, and I think this is kind of going by the wayside a little bit too. Is that it's hard to say Syracuse hasn't been able to punch up this year, but Donnie Freeman would have helped a lot in this game. And just in terms of
paint.
Size,
for sure.
Down low, being able to shoot, and pulling Ian Shefflin out of the paint.
Yeah.
That's one of the problems with Peter Majstorovic when he's on the floor. Is he gives great effort. He's going to grit, but when he's going against Ian Shefflin, who's one of the more talented 4-man in college basketball,
undersized.
He's just undersized, and there's not much he can do.
Yeah, and I mean, he'll give a charge, and you love the hustle plays out of him, but he isn't really making enough in-game stuff. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was right at the end of the game, we saw Elijah Moore just kind of chuck up a 3, unsportsmanlike thing to do at the end of the game. Did Autry say anything about that?
Autry didn't say anything after the game, but he did have a long, extended conversation with Elijah Moore as they left the court after the handshake line. So did Brendan Strawn. That's one of those things where maybe heat of the moment got caught up a little bit. The shot didn't end up counting after they ended up going to the replay because it was pretty close.
Yeah.
But nothing about the play per se. But he had a long, extended talk with Elijah Moore, which I'm pretty sure there were some words said about not doing that when you're down 14 with 1 second to go. It reminded me of that. I don't know if you guys remember this. That Monmouth game at Kansas.
Yes, I do. That caused quite a commotion.
That caused a lot more of a commotion than it did for this game. But still says this, still has the same kind of principles.
Absolutely.
I was about to say it almost gave me flashbacks to that moment. Yeah. But, I do agree that I wouldn't say I understand Elijah Moore's actions in that moment.
No. It's unacceptable no matter.
Right, it's unacceptable, but again, it's a heat of the moment thing completely.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, they got the offensive rebound, and there was just nothing to do other than walk off the court. And Elijah didn't even play. He only played 11 minutes. It's not like he was caught up. He played down the stretch. He ended up hitting a 3, too.
Yeah.
Almost hit that second 3. But, you just can't do that. It's on the road. You lost by somehow 14, only 14.
Yeah.
Because it was 20 points for the most part throughout the entire second half. But, yeah, you just can't do that, no matter if you're a freshman, sophomore, or Chase Hunter as a sixth-year senior.
Right. I mean, it is a double-digit loss, but Jordan, do you think there's any silver lining from this game, any positive takeaways from tonight?
I don't know. They're really, I mean, other than J.J. Starling just playing out of his mind, and hopefully he can do this again. That's probably the only silver lining is J.J. played very well, 10 of 16, 5 of 10 from 3. And I think the good thing was he didn't force up any shots. He didn't have any assists, which is, you'd love to see your guy who's handling the ball most of the time when he's on the floor have some assists. But, when he puts up 25 points, he has 20 of your 42 in the first half to keep you in the game. Not 42. It was 20 at some point. It was at some point 20 of the Syracuse 42 points. Either way, that's probably the biggest silver lining. But, this was a game where Syracuse had a chance to punch up in the ACC. I talked about it on the broadcast, and they had won 3 of 4. Even though it doesn't feel like it, they had won 3 of 4 games in the ACC. But you got to come out and play and stick in a game like this just to feel better about your season, because nobody's going to give you kind of any solace after you beat 3 teams toward the bottom of the ACC standings and then get blown out in a game against one of the top teams in the conference.
And we were talking earlier about JJ being Superman and having to carry the load and whatnot for this team, but who do you think, if anyone, really emerges as that second option? Will there be one by the end of the year?
It has to be in the paint. I think it can be by committee with Jair Davis and Eddie Lampkin. And, if Donnie Freeman, if or when Donnie Freeman comes back, that'll definitely help. But it's got to be through the paint, because not only does that establish down low, which is huge for Syracuse because they usually don't shoot the 3 well. They came in shooting under 30%.
Season high
somehow.
for threes.
Yeah,
tonight.
11,
Yeah.
52%, mostly JJ, 5 of 10 to be fair, and Kyle Cuff went 2 for 2. But going back to the paint, they got to establish down low, and Eddie and Jair are both good at passing out of the post too, which is why I think it's good for Syracuse offense to run through the post very much, and it also just takes the ball out of JJ's hands. Like, if JJ Starling, when he's on the court, and especially when Jaquan Carlos is off, if he's handling the ball all the time, then has to guard the top option or second top option on the other side of the court, he's just going to get gassed on both sides of the floor, and you just can't have that for a guy you need to score 20-plus every game.
I'm telling you, if Chris Bell could just unlock a little of what we saw last year, it would help this team tremendously.
It's a big if.
Oh, it's a huge if, absolutely.
I mean, he didn't touch the floor, I guess 18 minutes. He's still getting the treatment, funny enough, of a 3-point specialist, because I think teams know if he makes one,
he could heat up.
Get going.
Yeah,
but they still follow him. Like, they have a hand on him every single time down the floor, not letting him get any space, and that's part of the reason why. But at some point, you just got to be like, at some point they're going to go in. Just keep throwing him up there. At some point they're going to go in.
Yep.
And then play defense on the other side, hopefully.
Jordan, I got one more question before we let you go. When you look at this 3-game stretch coming up for Syracuse, you got Pitt, you got Stanford, you got Cal before you go into a meeting with Duke. What is the one thing that you would say Syracuse needs to take advantage of in these next few games?
They need to take advantage of. That's a good. I don't even know if there's something to take advantage of. Just play
in terms of like, what do they need to fix in this 3-game
It's the
stretch?
turnovers. Yeah, it's the turnovers for sure, and the defensive intensity. I think needs to be more than 20 minutes or 7 minutes it was today. They just need to put everything on the line. They got nothing else to lose this season. Come out, play 40 minutes, hard, intense basketball every single game. That 4-game stretch that you mentioned, because those 2 games in California are on the road, you're probably not going to be expected to win any of the 4. So just come out and play. Put up threes, quality threes. Maybe they'll fall like tonight, where you're at 11. So just keep playing hard. Eventually, things will go in your favor, and I will say some 50-50 balls and different things went in Clemson's favor today that didn't help Syracuse. But the more you keep doing that, the more you establish that kind of culture within the program, the better things are going to happen.
Well, Jordan, thank you so much. We appreciate your insight a lot. Always a pleasure. And safe travels from South Carolina.
Appreciate it, Shrikar.
Of course.
Enjoy the cold.
Oh, we are. And when we come back on the double overtime, we're going to go to the drawing board.
Got a whiteboard.
A whiteboard. Per se, and we're going to try and fix a lot of these issues that Syracuse is having. Stick with us. We'll be right back.
AJ Myers, Streetcar Rajendran, talking things over here on the double overtime after Syracuse falls to Clemson 86-72. Streetcar, I'm going to take you back to that Notre Dame game briefly. Right at the end of it, there was a picture, and Adrian Autry said it post-game. He said, I laid out choices for this team to make, and if they made those choices, they would win the game. So we're going to play a little game. He wrote it on a whiteboard as well. Not necessarily choices, but let's call it like fixes or things we could maybe fix.
Sure.
If you have a whiteboard at home, or if you don't, imagine you have a whiteboard. What are you writing on that whiteboard to try and fix these problems for Syracuse men's basketball? We want to hear about them. Give us a call at 315-443-2011, or you can text us, give us 3 bullet points or something like that to things that you could fix for this Syracuse team. You can text us at 315-556-3929. We're also, of course, on Twitter and YouTube at WAER Sports Talk. You can listen, comment there as well. We'll try and get your thoughts across the air. All right, Streetcar, you ready? I'm going to go first. My first fix for this team is put Kyle Cuff in the starting lineup. Elijah Moore, we've already talked about it. He was really hot. He was playing really well in the early middle part of the season. It's fallen off. He had a 6-game stretch where he barely scored. He had a little impact tonight. Kyle Cuff, every time he's on the floor, he's doing something right. He had 9 points tonight. Against Notre Dame, he had 13 points. He had 10 points against BC. And there's one thing you can rely on Kyle Cuff is that he's going to knock down at least 3 or 4 shots. And that's something with Elijah Moore right now you cannot rely on. And I understand you want to say, oh, Kyle Cuff is the 6th man. Bring him off the bench. Guess what? This team doesn't have a bench. You don't need a 6th man. You need him in the starting lineup. It puts a little less pressure on J.J. Starling in terms of handling the ball. Kyle Cuff, it's clear to me. Put him in the starting lineup.
AJ, here's the one part where I disagree with you. You said Kyle Cuff is good to make 2 to 4 shots a game.
That's more than Elijah Moore right now.
Sure. But would that change much? Because
you don't know until you try.
Because 2 to 4 shots, if you hit those, good. But is that really starter caliber? I don't view that and I say, okay, that's a guy who should be in the starting lineup.
I just think if you look at the options to start there, he's the best of the 3.
I'm with you.
Carlos, Elijah Moore out.
I'm with you on the fact that maybe it wouldn't hurt to try.
Yeah.
But is he going to be a mainstay in the starting lineup? I don't think so.
Maybe not. I think it's funny because Adrian Autry barely changed his starting lineup last season.
Yeah.
And then this year he's had to change it a lot because of injuries and whatnot. I just think...
And especially with how many minutes he's been given to Jaquan Carlos as well, that's minutes that are being taken away from Kyle Cuff.
Yeah, especially at the beginning of the season. I mean, I know I've supported Coach Autry a lot tonight. I'll put my hand up. I think it did take him too long to figure out that Jaquan Carlos didn't really belong in the starting lineup.
Yeah.
I think right now Elijah Moore's struggling. Send him down to the bench. Let him come off the bench and see if that can help him. You know what? Chris Bell said it would help him. It hasn't helped him yet. Maybe it will. But I think just putting Kyle Cuff in there, because I like J.J. Starling handling the ball, but I think if he doesn't always have to handle the ball, if it's not always his responsibility to handle the ball right from the start of possessions, that'll help them. And then he won't be asked to get a lot of assists. You'll ask Kyle Cuff to do those things, or you can also ask Kyle Cuff to blend in as that second option maybe. I'm not saying that he's second option caliber, but I'm saying that there's maybe something there in Kyle Cuff that we're just not seeing enough of.
Again, to me, I just view him as a spark plug off the bench. I just feel like he suits that role a little bit better. I'm not against you, though. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to just see what you got and put him in the starting lineup, especially when you look at the next 3 games. This is prime time to see what you got in Kyle Cuff, especially before you see Duke, because that's not the game where you throw him into the fire.
No, that's not the game where you try anything. Absolutely not. And yeah, you've mentioned these next 3 games a lot, and rightfully so, because they're against lesser opponents, teams that are struggling. I think if you're Coach Autry, maybe out west, put Kyle Cuff when you play Stanford and Cal, put Kyle Cuff into the starting lineup. I don't, for some reason, Autry is hesitant to play Cuff, even in general. For some reason, I don't think he has a lot of confidence in him. I don't know why, because every time he's on the floor, he makes
I'd be a little bit more confident. Yeah. It's just, is he a proven model of consistency? Not necessarily. He's been a little more consistent than what we've seen.
Compared to the rest of the team.
Compared to the rest of the team, he is. But again, to be a starter and to stay in the starting lineup, as a matter of fact.
And he takes threes too. I mean, he's not knocking him down necessarily, but he's taking them with confidence. I think he hit 2 tonight.
We'll see. I mean, that's your first fix. My first fix has to do with the defensive side of the ball, and I just think, I haven't mentioned it yet, but you got to stop going under screens. Okay. I think this is a huge issue, just defending on screens for SU, because a lot of the times you get caught lacking doing that. I don't think there's a need to keep going under on screens and just leaving a shooter wide open from the perimeter, especially a team that can shoot the ball as well as Clemson from beyond the arc.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a reason Chase Hunter went off. There's a reason that he caught fire from deep. It's because every time there was a screen set, Syracuse would stay under. They'd stay behind the line, and ultimately, as a shooter, you're going to be confident in those scenarios to just pull it because shooters shoot. And in this case, Clemson definitely did.
No, absolutely. And this is going to go back to my point that I made at the start of the show. Syracuse just doesn't have those defensive knowledge guys. They don't have guys that defensively are aware of things like that.
Right.
I just don't think it's there. The players aren't there on this team, and I mean, we keep circling.
Well, does that come with experience, though?
Maybe, sure, yeah.
I haven't seen it, though.
No, yeah, you have, and by now you think you should. You're in the thick of ACC play. You should know that you have to make these in-game defensive adjustments, and you should be making the right decisions on the defensive end. And here we go again. We're going back to the point. Is that an Adrian Autry thing? Should Adrian Autry be telling this team to stop going under screens? Yeah, that's his job at the end of the day. It is. And, I mean, I don't think Adrian Autry was ever brought in to be a defensive-minded coach, but, I mean, I came onto the show saying I'm not going to criticize Adrian Autry because it's not his fault. But there's a lot coming at me here that's making me want to change my mind. I don't want to change my mind. Adrian Autry, I like you. You're
Stand on it, AJ.
I think you're doing a good job. It's not all your fault, but there is a clear hole on the defensive side, and that's one of the problems. No doubt
well,
about
what
it.
do you think about Syracuse defending on screens? Good, bad? I generally think it's bad. I don't know how you see a good in it, but if you have any thoughts on what you've been hearing so far, you can go ahead and call into the show, 315-443-2011. You can text us at 315-556-3929, or you can interact with us on Twitter at WAER Sports Talk. AJ Myers and Shrikar Rajendran talking about the defensive lapses on this team, which led to a big blowout win for Clemson. Again, we've talked about defense ad nauseum, but I really do think it's important to hammer home the fact that if you want your perimeter defense to change, this is the way it's going to happen.
Do you go to a zone at all? Just tossing that out there.
I don't think it hurts to try it.
Yeah, I don't think it hurts to try it. Yeah.
Again, it's just like Kyle Cuff, where it's like at this point, you could go ahead and experiment. You can try it out.
Do it in these next 3 games. I think, have they gone to zone at all this year? I feel like there was a game.
I feel like they have. I can't put.
Can't put my finger on which game it was, but I think it's been tried.
They have.
I know people got really sick of the zone defense with Jim Boeheim, rightfully so, because that's all he ever played.
Yeah.
But when you're struggling this much defensively, and when you kind of worry if a team goes on a run, because that's the other thing. As soon as a team goes on a run, it's over for them. They can't. They other than Notre Dame, because the run happened in the first half mainly, and they were able to come back, but 9 times out of 10, when the opposing team for Syracuse, the team they're playing against, goes on a run, it's game over because they can't stop it. They can't stop the bleeding.
Well, I'll talk from some personal experience here. When I'm playing basketball, I mean, in any setting, I played a little bit back then, but when we get into a zone defense, I think it's a little bit more reassuring on myself because I know I'm guarding an area and not a player.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just me personally. I don't know how other people may feel about it, but look, I think that would actually help when it comes to going over on screens because you have, when you're guarding an area, you're a little bit more aware of what you're guarding and you're not losing track of anything. I think it's a little bit easier to stay focused and in the zone when you're in a zone defense. No pun intended. But I wouldn't see a problem in going to zone. I actually think that would alleviate this issue a little bit.
And I'm not saying you got to play the zone the entire game. Like, I like when teams go to zones out of nowhere. And it's like, you hear
and you just don't know how to deal with it.
The team can't handle the zone. What's going on here? They have no idea. Forced to call a timeout because they can't defend. They can't attack the zone. That's when you go to a zone. Maybe don't start in a zone, but teams going on a run, switch to it. See if that team you're playing can adjust to it.
Now, I hate to play devil's advocate here, but here is the issue with running zone. Yep. Syracuse was already slow in closing out.
Yes.
That's only going to be exacerbated by moving to zone.
And the paint points too.
Right,
zone
that
can
as
give
well.
up even more paint points.
So there's pros and cons. Again, if you want to try it, you can. I don't see an issue, but expect these things to happen. Yeah. Expect the cons to happen because I wouldn't say it's easier to get over it, but you can evaluate from there. You can see what you got. And we got a text here from Matt from Liverpool. He said Carlos has been better than Moore lately, and he also said that Batar needs to play more. So, AJ, how do we feel?
I'm sorry, Matt. I just don't think Majstorovic He's undersized, and he doesn't. What is his offensive game?
Yeah, and will it be better than Eddie Lampkin too? Right? Like I just don't. Maybe, but it's also a lack of production on his end. He won't give you much that Eddie hasn't already gave you. Is what I'd say.
And actually, Matt, that's conveniently goes into my next thing on my whiteboard, which is give Naheem McLeod an actual look. He has never, this whole season, he has not played any meaningful minutes. Give him an actual look. You want to stop the paint points from piling on. I know he didn't have a good year last year. I know he got hurt. I know he hasn't, you haven't really seen a whole lot from him because he hasn't been given an actual look. I think it's time to show, instead of Majstorovic, go with McLeod. Why not?
I think the reason why is because he's very tall. And unfortunately,
I think
when
you could
don't
be a present defensively. That height.
Sure, but when you don't have the skill set both ways when you're that size, it gives me a little bit of pause. And I think that's my issue in Naheem McLeod. Would he produce more than Majstorovic? I don't think so, to be honest. I don't think it would make that big of a difference.
All right, I'm going to go back to Matt's text. He says Carlos has played better than Moore lately. Well, I think if you put Naheem McLeod on the floor with Jaquan Carlos, a guy who is more of an assist player who is looking to pass the ball, that's not a lob threat maybe. Could Carlos be throwing up lobs to McLeod? Is that something this team is missing maybe?
I mean, will lobs win games? I mean, is that
get some points?
It could. And we have a caller here, Dave from Liverpool. He wants to talk about the state of the program, what SU's looking like going into the future. Dave, how are you?
Yeah, okay. I'm 72 years old, and I've followed SU basketball since about 1970. Used to go to the games at Manley Fieldhouse. It was $2.50.
Yes.
Do you guys realize that this streak of not going to the NCAA hasn't happened in at least 52 years?
Yes. Dave, this is going to be the first graduating class that will not see a March Madness game.
Dave, I'm a senior, and I've heard the brunt of it, and I'm embarrassed.
We have the largest facility in the United States for basketball.
Yep.
And we struggle with Lemoyne.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't forget about that.
I would like to see a new coach.
Oh, Dave.
They never should have. Let me point something out.
All right, no, go ahead.
It makes no sense to hire an assistant coach, which was part of SU coaching for while Boeheim was in the Atlantic Coast Conference, and Boeheim's only good year was the very first year.
Yes.
People do not understand the history of this program and how powerful it was, and now we're going to have another losing year.
Yeah.
And I don't see us winning any games until after Duke.
Well, Dave, if Syracuse were to let go of Adrian Autry, who would be your top choice for a new coach? Would it be in-house? Would it be going outside and looking?
They should have gone outside, and they could have gotten a coach, just like Louisville got a coach.
Yeah.
Syracuse could get a coach at a college or Tarleton type of program, and at least we'd go to the NIT, and
yeah. But Dave, here's the thing.
It's really a shame because it reminds me of the football program. People gave Dino Babers, 8 years?
Yeah.
If they give Autry, how many more years do you have to not go to the NCAA tournament?
Here's the thing. He just started coaching, and you talk about the history of this program. The history of the program was always finding people from within. I just think it would have been hard for John Wildhack to explore outside sources when he got Jim Boeheim's recommendation was head coach Adrian Autry. I just think it's too hard to give up on a guy that was Boeheim's choice.
Well, if that was Boeheim's choice, then Boeheim should have been fired many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You realize Boeheim had probably 35 great years and then 10 crummy years.
Sure.
As I said, once we went into the Atlantic Coast Conference, we only had one good year the very first year.
That's fair. And look, it's a new landscape of college basketball, Dave. We really appreciate your call. A lot of calls coming in tonight about head coach Adrian Autry, about the coaching. I'll be honest, it was something I kind of thought would happen. I didn't really want to talk about it because it's too early to just totally put the nail in the coffin for Adrian Autry. It's his second year. Way too early, I think.
Well, it's early. Is it way too early? No.
Yes,
because there's a reason behind everything, AJ. And at the end of the day, if the team is not performing, by way of, widespread discourse.
Yeah.
Your head coach will be not necessarily in the hot seat, but his cushion will start to warm just a little bit.
Sure.
And I think that's fair.
Look at last year. He had a good year last year, Adrian Autry.
Yeah, and then look at this year. If you get a better roster, or I should say more recruits, this year, and you do worse than last year, then it's a little bit of a strain.
It is.
I would say.
It is definitely. We're playing a little game we had imaginary whiteboard. We're writing things down. On my whiteboard, there was nothing about head coach Adrian Autry. There were some things that he could maybe change if you think there's something that Adrian Autry should change, or if you want to be like a lot of callers tonight and say it's time for Adrian Autry to go. Sure, shoot us a call, 315-443-2011. Shrikar, I believe I've listed two things off of my whiteboard. What is your second whiteboard thing?
Well, I think...
Or change.
Right, so my first fix had to do on the defensive side of the ball. The second one is more on the offensive side. You got to take smarter shots, and you got to keep moving off the ball to get one. As I mentioned before, there was one possession where J.J. Starling was being doubled, and Bell and Taylor were just on either end just kind of sitting ducks.
Yeah.
And in those scenarios, you need to move. You need to give J.J. some options. You need to make him comfortable because in the presence of a double team, it's easy to panic, right? It's easy to just kind of freeze up. It's something I did a lot. But look, in this setting, when you got premier ACC teams that are going to hound you with the defensive play, you need to keep moving. You need to keep trying to find pockets where, okay, maybe I'm going to have a good pass here, or maybe I'm going to have a good shot here. Maybe get to the rim.
Yeah. I almost wonder, though, are those players such as Chris Bell or Lucas Taylor looking at J.J. Starling and saying, well, this guy's got the keys. He's going to be our scorer, and they're just kind of taking a back seat.
You can't run your offense like that.
No,
that's the issue.
I think that's unfortunately what the mold of some of these players have gotten into is, all right, yeah, J.J. Starling, he's probably going to – we'll have him take over.
Yeah.
I think it's part of that and partly is a confidence thing. Chris Bell doesn't have a lot of confidence now. Lucas Taylor never had confidence on the offensive side of the ball. I think – other than maybe shooting the three, and maybe that's something they need to get him into more. But, I think that's a problem. But here's the reason why I think there's a lack of ball movement is because this team doesn't have a true point guard. That was supposed to be Jaquan Carlos.
Yeah, I agree with you.
They don't have someone to facilitate the ball and get to those open shooters. So that's why it's becoming somewhat of a stagnant offense.
Right, and I'm never going to speak on a player's confidence.
No.
I can't read minds.
No,
you're right. I'm sitting here right across from you based on what I watched on a TV, right? I can't read a player's mind, but I do think you got to have we got a call talking about the will and drive.
Yeah.
You got to have the drive to just go and get open. Like I just think that's as easy as it'll get, but again, easier said than done.
Definitely.
Much easier said
and
than done.
I think again, it goes back to the, if I sat Adrian Autry down at the start of the year and said, Chris Bell be coming off your bench, and so too would Jaquan Carlos, I think he'd be like, what? Because, again, those were two things that were supposed to be – Bell was supposed to be that guy that was going to be off-ball moving, getting open for their three and knocking it down. That hasn't happened at all this year. And the guy that was supposed to be getting Chris Bell the ball was Jaquan Carlos, and that hasn't panned out either. And, if you want to point the blame to Adrian Autry, sure, fine. He brought in the wrong guys. Sure, it's all his fault.
AJ, it's getting more and more convincing, AJ.
It is.
With each point we make.
Unfortunately, it is. I'm going to go to my third thing on the whiteboard. It doesn't have anything to do with Coach Autry, as I alluded to. It has something to do with Eddie Lampkin, and I'm someone who has played good, but I consistently keep saying this. It's always a quiet 10 points, a quiet double-double from Eddie Lampkin, and maybe that's me just being, I had too much expectation for Lampkin. I kind of thought he would get into the near 20s maybe, but he hasn't. Maybe if this team could get him in is if they got him the ball more early on. I think right away, get Eddie Lampkin the ball, get him in the paint early on. None of these threes. He should be taking threes.
No threes.
Get him in the paint. Get him that bully ball. What we saw in the second half against Notre Dame. That's the best version of Eddie Lampkin. Get that at the start of the game.
Yeah, he can produce. We've seen it. Yeah. He can produce. It's just a matter of putting him in the right spots at the right times. And I think that is another thing that comes with coaching, but I won't dive I won't dive too much more into that rabbit hole. But I do think, yes, I agree. Eddie Lampkin can be very solid. And it's all about how you're going to use him, and can you use him early on. I agree there, too. I think the earlier you get him going, the more he can physically wear down a defender and a defense as a whole.
Yeah, I just think well over midway through the season, I thought you'd be seeing more out of Eddie Lampkin now, and you just haven't yet.
Yeah.
You just haven't. And again, maybe that goes back to the point.
But he's been there.
He has. He's gotten the double-doubles. Tonight you did everything you could. I don't think you could have asked him to do anything more tonight, right?
And I think that embodies his season. Good, nothing outstanding, not flashy. He goes in, he does his work, and he comes out the game with a stat line that resembles that, right?
He does, yeah.
So
I just think if you could maybe you could squeeze more out of the orange there. You know what I mean? You could get more out of Eddie Lampkin.
No pun intended, but yes.
Yeah, exactly.
You 100% could. I mean, we're firing him off with the puns now, AJ. But
got a pun, call in.
Again, I do agree. Yes, if you do have a pun, call in 315-443-2011. I do agree. And I think Lampkin and Davis could be brought into this as well, because if you want to talk about pain points, you can't. Naheem McLeod, you know what? Sure. We'll bring in Naheem McLeod.
Sure.
We'll bring him in as well, because I'm just talking about big guys as a whole. If you can be physical, if you can wear down a defense, it does a lot. Right.
Yeah.
It's like running the ball in football. Just going into your first drive, before a postscript offense and just running the football down someone's throat and then just keeping your foot on the gas. You could do that in basketball too. Not exactly the same, but the same idea exists.
And I think they need to do that because the shooting isn't there. You don't have guys. Tonight you knocked down 11 threes, but going into that Pitt game, you can't expect to hit 11 threes. No way. No. Based off the entire season, absolutely not. So go into the paint. Be more of a paint-present team. I just think this team needs to do more of it.
Yeah, and as a whole, just assert your dominance. I think that's the biggest thing I could say.
Absolutely.
My third thing I put on my whiteboard. All right. I went defensive with my first one. I went offensive with my second one. And I think this one blends the two of them together perfectly. We talked about it before. Taking care of the basketball.
Yep.
Obviously
it's
easier.
Simple too.
It's simple. It's easier said than done.
Yeah, maybe.
But the turnovers tonight were a killer. We talked about it with Jordan too. But when Clemson gets, so many points, 19 off turnovers, it goes to show that taking care of the basketball goes a long way. And you just can't let Clemson get out in transition, get these free buckets, because they were already the faster team coming in.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Syracuse knew that they had to keep up with the speed of Clemson in some way. But if you're going to give the ball up, that allows them to push the tempo on you. And then what are you going to do in that situation? As they keep racking up points on you, you fall further and further into a hole. And that just, again, we talk about confidence, lowers the confidence. You got to get back in the game, and it can lead to careless plays right off that. So again and again and again, the turnovers, if you don't cut out the problem early on, it'll always be a recurring problem throughout the game.
Absolutely. And you just had a football comparison. I'm going to have another one.
Yeah.
Turnovers in basketball are like committing too many penalties in football. The team that commits too many penalties is 9 times out of 10 is going to lose.
For sure.
A team that commits too many turnovers will lose. And look, if you go to any big loss this year for Syracuse, I just went to the Louisville one to look. In that Louisville game, Syracuse committed 14 turnovers. The Cardinals had 17 points off those turnovers.
Yeah.
Those are easy 17 points. Those are 17 points you take away.
These are two good ACC teams as well. So, look, bottom line is against any team, you just cannot let anyone get a sliver of hope. No. And that sliver of hope comes in the form of a turnover.
Especially the good teams. You can't give the good teams the free baskets.
Exactly.
Because they will capitalize. And that's exactly what Clemson did tonight. They got those turnovers and they capitalized.
Right. And it's, again, you say it's simple, but it's
hard
to
it's
just,
not that simple now.
It's very hard to just tell a team to, okay, take care of the ball.
Yeah.
Because you could do that and teams can still hound you defensively, and there's nothing you can do about it.
And Jordan told us this. Adrian Autry said in his post-game press conference he didn't know why the team was doing cross-court passes to start the game. That makes no sense. I mean, that's basic level stuff not to do that. That generates easy turnovers, and that's what spun the momentum around. That's what gave the momentum in favor of the Tigers. And I didn't think I'd be making this point a lot, but does that, again, go to the fact this team doesn't have a natural ball handler, really?
Exactly.
Maybe, sure, I guess Jaquan Carlos is in a way, but, J.J. Starling, he's not careless with the basketball, but he can create turnovers a lot.
Right. We were misled with Carlos, I think, the whole way because he was brought in with the idea of he was going to be a facilitator. He was going to be a guy that could handle the responsibility of being a floor general, and ultimately we haven't really seen that. But I agree that J.J. Starling is one of those guys that, yeah, he's good with the ball in his hands, but he's maybe not good when he has the ball in his hands and he's dribbling up the court because he's a guy that's going to be good off how the offense will flow around him. And if the offense is moving, again, that goes back to off-ball movement. If the offense is moving and flowing around him, he can get in his bag because he's going to work off what the defense gives him. If you key in on him, it's going to be a completely different J.J. Starling.
Definitely. And look, J.J. Starling is doing everything he can. There's no doubt.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you can't put any blame on J.J. Starling.
Sure.
He has been the team's best player by a long shot. But if you erase these turnovers, you erase some of the deficit.
Who knows?
Who knows what the record is?
Who knows? And you got Duke coming up, so you got to fix it before then. But look, when we look at all of these fixes, it's pretty incredible that we just have 6 of them listed out, and they're all different. I think that goes to show you how this program and this team is looking right now. It kind of goes to show that we could really just pull out 6 different things that just stemmed from one game.
Yeah.
And these are all season-long issues as well.
Yeah, and if I could circle one thing on my whiteboard that I think would be the biggest one, I think the Naheem McLeod, maybe that's just me really wanting to see a player that we haven't seen at all. And I
keep banging the drum.
I had a lot of expectation for McLeod when he came over not last season. And I think the Kyle Cuff thing is I'm fine with him getting off the bench. Just give him more minutes. The one thing I would circle would be my last one. It would just be that paint presence with Lampkin.
Yeah, I'd circle taking care of the basketball because, again, it blends the offensive and defensive facets of the game. Because
if you fix it, it fixes a lot of things.
Right, because you turn the ball over on offense, you let a team get in transition, it makes your defense worse. So, overall, a lot of fixes in store for this Syracuse squad. When we return on the double overtime, we're going to give our final words on what was a blowout loss in Littlejohn Coliseum and maybe look ahead to the next game coming up for SU. Stay with us.
There is a one-stop listen.
Gives to Hunter, his left wing 3 is pure. Chase Hunter, 10 points, 2 triples.
One last time tonight, welcome back in to the double overtime. Shrikar Rajendran alongside AJ Myers breaking down Syracuse's 86-72 loss to Clemson tonight in South Carolina. It is currently 10:46, so we got you for another 14 minutes here, if my math serves me right. Got you up until 11 o'clock. If you have any last-minute questions, you can go ahead and call in 315-443-2011, or you can text us 315-556-3929, or you can interact with us still on Twitter at WAER Sports Talk. But before we wrap up here, I think it's only right we give our final words for this one. And we had a lot of words over the course of this game, but AJ, what is that one lasting thought?
Well, I'm going to say, I don't want to speak for the callers, but I think the callers' final word is, put Adrian Autry on the hot seat, maybe. I was surprised that
AJ's taking offense, callers.
Yeah, I didn't see all this heat towards Adrian Autry coming, but what do I know? My final word is reality. This is the reality of the season for Syracuse. They're not that good. Against good teams, they're going to get blown out. Duke, North Carolina, I know they upset UNC last year. Maybe they can pull off a big upset like they did last year, but I think they're going to be blowout losses. Every time this team has gone up against a good opponent, Tennessee, Maryland, the little tournament they played at the start of the year against the Texas teams. I already said Maryland, Louisville. Again, you had Clemson tonight. Good teams, quality teams that have shooters, that have a big man. They're going to get blown out. That's what it is. I don't think Adrian Autry can do anything coaching-wise. Maybe that's something he has to look at in the offseason. Definitely, sure. He needs to look at in the offseason the type of players he's bringing in from the transfer portal, because outside of Eddie Lampkin and maybe Jair Davis, he's kind of swung and missed on everyone else. They haven't really delivered. So, yes, offseason, look those things over, but right now I don't see a whole ton Adrian Autry can do, nor can this team do, because, like we said, they're not good defensively. If they can fix that, sure, maybe some things change around. But the bigger one is there's no second option. And unfortunately, the reality of the situation is right now, I don't see a second option popping up unless Donnie Freeman comes back and, comes back a different player than he was before he got his injury. But this is the reality for Syracuse men's basketball. I know a lot of callers touched on it. It's a sad reality. It's a reality that is not the expectation for Syracuse. It's not the standard that this team is. And unfortunately, it's been something that the last 3 seasons there's been no tournament. And right now they're staring at a reality where it's going to be 4 years in a row. There's no NCAA tournament.
That's a really strong word there, reality. And I like that your final word was quite literally a word. But I fully agree. I think it's very important that we kind of live in that reality. And, we kind of take to heart, but take to mind that maybe this team is not at the standard it's at, but it could be down the road. But looking at just this season, I tend to agree. It's important that we live in that reality.
And here's my other thing. Jordan touched on this. College basketball is different than professional. You're not tanking or anything.
Yeah.
So when people say, oh, this team's in a rebuilding process, what does that mean?
Yeah.
It's not like, what are you going to have 1 year to rebuild? No, this wasn't supposed to be a rebuilding year. Adrian Autry said that. He said he knew what this team needed to do to get back to the tournament. I think his next thing he said after that was win games, which... Sorry, Coach Autry. It's kind of like obvious. Obviously, you need to win games to make the tournament. But no, they're not rebuilding. It's just they got a new coach. They're establishing a new culture, almost a new program in a way. Give the man some time. Give him some time, because right now, I think there's too much pressure on Autry. And the reality is, it's not rebuilding. They're not rebuilding anything. They're just readjusting almost.
Win games. Coach Autry, I actually really like that quote, contrary to AJ, because it leads perfectly into my final word. And it's something I've alluded to throughout the show. If you've been listening to the double overtime from the time we started after the game, it's taking advantage of these next few games. Yeah. It's again, winning games, as Coach Autry would like to say. But it's also because it's not just because of the strength of schedule. I mean, you do have Pitt, you have Stanford, you have Cal. I'm not going to say that Syracuse needs to fix their issues in these 3 games, but you need to mediate them. You need to find some sort of solution, and put it into action. It doesn't mean that it's going to be fixed right away, and I'm aware of that. That's living in reality, like AJ was alluding to. But I do think that it's important that this team at least has some sort of plan in place. They are executing a little bit better, whether it was what I had on my whiteboard with taking care of the basketball, going with off-ball movement, or just, other issues with shot selection or trying to keep consistency throughout a game. No matter what the issue is, mediate it. And you can do that by taking advantage of these next few games. And I think that's the advantage that you can get. Because, look, Uncle Mo has a way. Uncle Mo has a way. Momentum can always favor those
Look what happened
who
to
choose
NC
to
State.
take it.
Look what happened to NC State. They got momentum going into the ACC tournament. They made a crazy run. That could still happen. Wouldn't that change the narrative for head coach Adrian Autry?
Look, okay. AJ, reality.
Yeah,
we can't. This team is not NC State.
No,
but
you don't know.
You never know. But you know,
I think you do know.
Look, again, it's mediating issues, figuring out what's going wrong, and just a little bit of a mental check. I think this is a little bit of a mental check for Syracuse in that you have these next 3 games at your disposal. Use it to fix, experiment, do whatever you want with them.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, you got to be better than where you were before. Progress is the most important thing I want to hammer home here. You got to be making progress.
Definitely. You can't agree. Every game you need to go out and try and win and try and progress and try and gain some momentum in those next 3 games. You got Pitt, you got Stanford, you got Cal. Both Pitt and Stanford are both 12-6, and then Cal is sitting at 500 right now.
Yeah.
So they're very winnable games. They're all in the, if you like the quad rankings, they're all in the quad 2 realm. So that means that they're middle of the pack. The reason the 2 West Coast games are quad 2 is because they're on the road.
Right.
Realistically, they're more quad 3. Pitt at home is they're probably the toughest of the 3. That's why it's leaning more of that quad 2 realm. So, I think 3 very winnable games coming up. I think if I'm going to throw out a record, I think they go 2-1. I think maybe some momentum does come their way. I think they win both games out west.
I'll one-up you. I think they go 3-0.
Wow.
I think they go 3-0.
What makes you say they'll go 3-0?
Well, if I look at it, let's go game by game. Okay. Pitt, they're on the downswing right now. I think Syracuse, obviously in desperate need of a bounce back. I think they're going to get it done in the Dome. The time difference when you travel to Stanford does worry me a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think Syracuse is a cut above Stanford. I think they should be able to get it done.
I mean, that shouldn't really be an excuse. I know it's the first time they've ever had to do this in the middle of a season like this.
Yeah. But, I mean, you're going to deal with it in the pros. You could deal with it here.
Absolutely. And maybe going out west helps the team. Maybe they need to get that. Hey, I would love to go.
Could be because once they adjust, and assuming they do beat Stanford, like I think they will.
Yeah, I'd love to go to warmer weather right now.
Right.
I know it was warm in Clemson, but maybe that'll help the team. I'm assuming they'll stay out there, given that they have the 2 games back to back. So. Maybe that'll help the team. Maybe they need to get away from the East Coast a little bit and head out west. And again, it's 2 winnable games.
Exactly. And then you got Cal right after, which if you've adjusted to the time by then, which they should have. I think Cal is another winnable game there. I think they'll go 3-0 during that stretch. And whatever happens after happens after.
Yeah, what happens after that? That's the tough part of the schedule.
But if we're just looking at those 3 games, I think they should be able to get it done, go 3-0. The one loss, though, I think, between all 3 of those, I know we talked about the time difference with Stanford, but also Pitt could be a little bit dangerous in that regard too, because I look
Pitt always comes to play in the Dome.
They do, and I look at the big men they have. Zach Austin, Cameron Corrin, Guillermo Diaz-Graham, excuse me. All strong guys who can play bully ball.
And what is this team not good at? The paint.
Right, so
they
how
give
will
them a ton of paint points?
How will Eddie Lampkin, and Jair Davis work against these big fellas, right?
Let me pull out my whiteboard. You got a guy in Naheem McLeod who is quite tall. Why not give him a run in that game?
Right, McLeod or not, again, it's going to be a big test for Syracuse either way. Don't let the skid for Pitt or the record fool you, right?
No.
Because this team needs to stay locked in.
Oh,
and
absolutely,
I think there are matchup advantages for Pitt there as well. I do think Syracuse ends up getting the job done, but look, it's not something to be mulled over.
We've already seen it this year. When Syracuse underestimates an opponent, it's not good. Look at Youngstown State. Look at LeMoyne. They underestimated those 2 teams, and they almost lost. If you do that in ACC play, you'll definitely lose. They cannot afford to underestimate any team coming up here. But you've said it all show, and I love that you have, and it's a great point. These next 3 games are a real opportunity to try and gain momentum because they haven't gotten a real win streak this year.
Yeah, that's the one thing they're in search of, right?
They had
and that's
a
where
2-game win
momentum
streak
stems
with
from.
Georgia Tech, Boston College.
Yeah, exactly.
Outside of that, there has been no consecutive wins other than the first 3 games, which I don't count. And you barely won those first 3 games. LeMoyne, Colgate, Youngstown State. So those don't count. If you can get anything going before you have to play Duke, you'd take that.
Right. And I think this leads into an interesting point about if Syracuse does end up achieving the 3-0 stretch.
Yeah.
When you got Duke right after,
Maybe Duke doesn't show up to play.
Do you give him a little bit more of a chance in that one?
No, because I've watched
Just
Cooper
not
Flag
even
last
not
two
even
games.
a little bit more.
No, not at all. But I think if you win 3 games in a row, Adrian Autry's seat gets a little cooler, maybe.
Okay, but at the same, it would, but only because of
they're winning.
The competition and they're winning, right?
Winning solves everything.
But it would be a statement to go to the West Coast and go 2-0, right?
Absolutely.
That shows in how you prepare a team. That shows how you lead a team, right?
Yeah.
So I do think that would actually give you some Autry points.
You don't know if Jerry McNamara can do that. He doesn't have to go out west. See,
we don't have to put that in.
You don't know if he can do that.
Hey, we don't, and maybe we never will. But
probably not.
Adrian Autry is, as far as we're concerned, still the guy in charge and still leading this team into battle every game, right? And as long as you can keep making progress, as I alluded to before, this team is going to be in good standing moving forward.
Definitely.
Now, good time to talk about our next broadcast. Syracuse versus Pitt, Saturday, January 25th. McClurg Remodeling countdown to tip-off will get going at noon. The game will start at 12:30, and the double overtime will be running until 4:30 p.m. Before we tag out here, some thank yous to hand out. Our producer, Skylar Wilkes, our engineer, Jish Sokolsky, and our WAER Sports Talk desk team, Dan Shalom, Nate Martin, and Corey Miller. AJ, any last parting words before we depart?
Yes, I've said it all show, but Adrian Autry, I have full confidence in him. I think he needs, maybe not 10 years, but he needs some time. I think he can be the guy that does get this team back to the NCAA tournament. I don't know if it's going to happen. It won't probably. Reality is it won't happen this year, going back to my final word. But give him some time. Let him adjust. They gave Jim Boeheim a lot of time, and he didn't start winning until, relatively later in his career. I know it didn't end well for him either, but give Adrian Autry some time. Let him develop as a coach. Yes, players have to develop, but so does he. He deserves time. I think he's doing the right things. He's honest when he goes to the press, when he goes to the post-game podium. He's always honest about defeats. I think that's something you don't see from some coaches. You kind of see them hiding in defeat. He doesn't do that. Give him some time.
Time will tell, as it always does, brick by brick. It'll be interesting to see how this program changes in the future, in the near future, I should say. I want to extend a big thank you from myself, Shrikar Rajendran, and the man right across from me, AJ Myers, who I had a pleasure talking to. We thank you for joining us on the Double Overtime, and we'll see you next time.